Hello and welcome to Dice Punks, a tabletop role-playing podcast where we focus on playing full campaigns in less well-known systems. This week in episode 16, our nobilis must decide what to do with the information they've gained in their travels regarding Fury's malady. Hello and welcome. I'm Adam, your friendly neighborhood game master, and joining me are...
Hi, I'm Drew, and I'll be playing Dask, Regent of Nothing, Regal of Nothing, both. Everything, nothing.
I'm Robin, and I'll be playing Lyssa, the beleaguered and besieged Duchess of Fury.
I don't know if I've ever mentioned how much I appreciate the alliteration, and I don't know if I'm ruining it by calling it out, but I do appreciate it.
Same. Hard same.
So thank you. Before we get started, let's briefly recap any character stat growth and the events of the previous episode for ourselves and our listeners. Any XP expenditure, do we think?
I think I'm still in saving my pennies mode, yeah.
Fair enough.
I'm still keeping those puppies in the piggy bank.
Well, in that case, I think Lyssa has our recap this time.
Right. Thanks, Hollyhock God. Back when I was strictly mortal, I used to joke often about consorting with gods and goddesses alike. Speaking of, how are you today, dear listener? Your smile is simply divine, and I hope you have occasion to perform that miracle often. At any rate, I used to believe that I frequently consorted with gods and goddesses. Now that's become a rather too literal for my liking. Nyx visited Dask and I in the midst of our first real bath in, well, God knows how long. Her visitation was sensational, also in a literal sense, and seemed to go marginally better for me than poor Dask. I'm not sure that any resolution was reached. Inscrutable communication seems to be all the rage these days with God folks. Dask and I set out to gain insight from Apatea, only to discover that she was beset by something. I couldn't see it at first, but then I reached out with my spirit, opened eyes that were not eyes at all, and I saw, layered like gossamer over the real, a glimmering, ephemeral world of ghosts and souls long past. And I could see them, the ancestor spirits that seemed to have the penchant for turning the people of this land into monstrous beasts. They seemed to deflect off my aura, as though I were blazing hot metal and they water. Between Dask and I, we were able to defend Apatea against their pestering. She thought that I'd sent them, and, I might have. I don't know, I didn't mean to, but what's important is that I managed to clear the air with her, and with Dask. We all agreed to work together to solve our problem, and, for the first time in a while, I'm filled with a furious kind of hope.
Thank you very much. That was lovely. And that's pretty much where we pick up. I think we left last time. You had left Apatea to sleep off her ordeal in her quarters in the temple at the back of the canyon in Keylata, and gone out to the city, talking amongst yourselves, looked up at the deepening twilight in the sky, and had a moment of peace. That's, I think, where we resume, perhaps with the question, how long are you staying out, and what are you getting up to?
I believe we promised to be there when Apatea woke up, and we have little and less idea how long she sleeps, when she sleeps, since sleep seems new to her, I think. So we probably don't want to stay out too long. Do we have anything we need to do right about now? Probably not.
I don't think so.
I mean, a lot, but nothing we can do by shopping.
Right. Other than maybe feel better about your predicament.
Yeah, sure enough.
Yeah,
we
otherwise
probably
it's just a
return
moment of peace.
To Apatea. Yeah, we the moment of peace, I think, is much needed, but passes, and we head back inside.
Very well, yeah. No one takes more than a passing notice of you as you head back in through the compact but grandly appointed entryway down the hallway to Apatia's room. It's small and probably a little cramped for Lyssa, but not uncomfortable. And you settle in to wait. Anything in particular that you get up to while Apatia rests?
I think we have a whispered conversation, which I won't fully whisper for audio equipment reasons, but
Sure.
I say, it just occurred to me that it's a bit strange that it never occurred to me once to seek out some dark place and check in with the big they. Is that strange?
I've kind of been checking in by hopping into Varric's head, for lack of a better description of whatever it is exactly I'm doing. But I don't think it could hurt. I'm just not sure if it would work here. There don't seem to be anyone here that knows who the Obsidian God is.
That's a good point. In theory, anywhere dark would work, but oh no, have I been burdening Vruta with this too? Not just perceived madness, but knowledge of obsidian, the two... I can't even think about it right now. I refuse to think about it right now. Maybe we just wait for Apatia to wake up and we work our way from there. We're clearly on our own, in one sense or another.
Well,
unless you think we should check in.
I could always see what Varric is up to. Is there anything in particular, anyone that you'd like him to inquire after?
You're gonna make me say it. I'm wondering how Ramnet is doing. I'm also, to be fair, wondering about the spreading malady of people losing their tolerance for the darkness, but mostly I'm wondering how Ramnet's doing.
Well, I'd be happy to look into that for you.
I mean, it'd be appreciated. We seem to have some time on our hands.
I'm gonna do the half nudge to Varric to make sure he's decent.
You half nudge Varric. He is decent. You perceive, unfortunately for you, don't have to feel it, that he is actually at the forge and is surprised enough by your nudge that he hammers his thumb. So you slide fully into his senses as he shakes his hand and curses.
I am so sorry.
Alas, it's okay. I'll just have to get used to it, you know. It's oh boy, that smarts. And he puts it in the quenching barrel to try and cool it off. And while he does that, he says, "What can I do for you, lass? Are you well?"
All seems to be well. We found ourselves an ally over here, and it seems like we're getting closer to solving the problem. I am here with a couple of requests. I know I was troubled in my last visit, so I want to reassure you that I'm taking steps to make things right over here. But
that's good, lass.
I want to make sure that Ramnet is doing well for Dask.
Oh, the pretty lad, right. I call him a priest? No, the prophet. Yeah, as far as I know, he's fine, just keeping busy. I get the feeling there's politics or something going on, but I just try to keep my head out of that. But he seems alright. He's here and there, but as far as I can tell, it's routine.
Also, is Kea any better?
He pauses for a moment and then goes, Oh, well, I think so. She seems to have found, I don't know what you'd call it exactly, a group of the similarly afflicted. They seem to be kind of helping each other out, looking for each other. I don't think it's a big group, but they are kind of keeping things lit around each other. Seems popular. She does. Seems a little less on edge, but I don't honestly see that much of her. She hasn't been as much in evidence around the nightcap lately. But she still takes a shift there occasionally, and seems a little bit firmer on her feet, I suppose.
I'm relieved to hear that.
Oh, aye.
Well, I will let you get back to whatever project you're working on.
He snorts and he goes, honestly, at the moment, it's just necessities. Nails, pot handles, the stuff people need day in and day out. Work never ends, but it's not interesting. You know how it goes at the forge.
I do, but hopefully a fun project will find its way into your lap.
Here's hoping, lass, and he hefts his hammer in his right hand and he says, go on, save the world or whatever it is you do.
Keep hammering away at it.
I will. And he shakes his hand one more time and kind of grabs his thumb and then goes back to work on his forge.
When you come back into yourself, my eyes dart away from you like I wasn't looking at you. I'm sitting in a chair in a probably perfectly unconvincing counterfeit of nonchalance.
I chuckle a bit and say, Ramnet's doing well. Busy, but well.
A shadow crosses my face at busy, but otherwise I'm pleased to hear it.
I don't pick up on the shadow and kind of immediately go into the fact that Kea is also doing better. It seems like there's a group of them now that are dealing with the fear of the darkness, and they're just struggling to keep their world bright.
Well, it's not probably good that there's enough to form a group, but it is probably good that they formed one. Better than the alternative, I suppose, which would be suffering alone. I don't want them to suffer at all, but good. I'm glad she hasn't gotten any worse, at the very least.
Yeah, it seems that once our work here is done, we have more work awaiting us back in Fermata.
Seems that's going to be our cycle for some time.
Indeed.
And, look, they've found a group. As I've said, I'm glad I found you.
Yeah.
It's good not to go through this alone.
Yeah. I'm glad you're here. And I'm glad that we found Apatea, too. It's nice having someone with a bit more experience than you and I about this whole Nobilis thing.
Yes, about that. She does seem more experienced with this, but not so much with mortality? Does she remember before? Was there a before for her? That's still not clear to me.
I'm not sure myself. She mentioned that she was made, not born, as I recall.
As a point of clarification there, Lyssa may or may not remember this distinction, but our listeners might, depending on the individual. I believe her words were that she believes Nyx made her, but she did not deny having been born. She didn't say it was made, not born. She just said that Nyx formed her. So there's room there for Nyx having, engineered her birth or whatever.
We're not in a full Macbeth loophole here. There's the room. I gotcha.
That's not
again
Anakin.
Whether or not that's
sure.
Yeah, okay. whether or not that's something that Lyssa is thinking about. I just wanted to clarify for the audience at home that if they were thinking, wait a minute, I thought he said.
Yeah.
No, totally. All right. No, thank you for that. Okay. Yeah. No, I at this talk, I look over to the sleeping Apatea with a look that, though I would not have these words, Dask would not have these words, our listeners would recognize as a look of having been noticed by Senpai. I seem to have killed the hollyhock.
Yeah.
Sorry, I did not expect the build-up that you gave that to lead in that direction. It was just a nice little misdirect. But time passes. If there's any particular way you wish to be spending it, you certainly may. Otherwise, you can get rest of your own, chat, invent a game to play. snoop whatever it is that you wish to do in the meantime. But adjourning
table talk. Are there things we need to do?
None come.
I can't
to
think
mind.
how we could prepare ourselves for what's about to happen without Apatea. So
yeah. I, for one, probably lean up against her bed, cross my arms, and do that half snooze with my head kind of lowered.
I know exactly the posture that you mean. It's interesting because, especially with the relaxed but not necessarily comfortable position combined with the ongoing ache of fury and distress, you can kind of, almost like when you sleep in the car, but you can't quite drop off entirely. Once evening starts to arrive, which, again, is a little more detectable here than it is in Fermata. It's never quite bright enough for the stars to go away entirely here in this canyon. But, it's brighter and darker. You get full night and you get kind of a gloaming quality. And once night starts to set in, Lyssa, you have a sensation. Trying to think of a good way to put it. When you use like a pain relief ointment or something, you can still feel the pain, but it is like dulled. You feel something like that apply to the ache of fury, and you get the impression of like pressure being applied. So maybe if you stub your toe and then squeeze it, that kind of relief. But again, in your fury sense, it's kind of confusing because your fury sense has been largely spatial. Like your proprioception on the level of your soul applies to fury throughout the world. So you're not entirely sure what to make of it, but maybe a second into processing this, Apatea sits bolt upright in her bed, fully alert, and says, "I don't know what, but something is happening. Nyx has awoken me." She hops off her bed. She wasn't under the covers or anything, just sleeping in her kind of habit atop them. And she sort of jumps off the bed, almost landing in Lyssa's lap, not having looked to see where she was first. And she loses a little bit of her customary composition before sort of looking around, and then down at Lyssa and over at Dask and saying, "How long has it been?" For the record, an afternoon.
An afternoon.
She nods and continues to kind of seems to continue trying to suss out what Nyx might be saying to her. So do the two of you have any particular reaction to this development?
I will try to describe what I'm feeling. It probably sounds something along the lines of, I don't hurt anymore. It feels like something is trying to help me.
Apatea kind of nods once quickly and says, "I see. That implies that... Okay, I think that Nyx is telling me that it's something from outside the valley." She looks like she's going to say one thing and then stops short and turns to you and says, "That's right. You may not know. This valley is where Nyx's law holds sway, but the Diamachor spread further. There are those who keep to the old ways outside of it. I think we may be dealing with something that they're doing. They remember Nyx, but they do not revere her." She looks down. "They still Oh, Mother Nyx, they still worship the ancestors! And she goes over to her wardrobe and flings the doors open. You can see there are a few habits in there, as well as some more practical clothes in similar colors. And she starts tossing things onto her bed, including sort of gear as well as clothes, and tries to continue describing. She says, "We'll need to move quickly. I think, yes, we'll need to check at least the borders of the valley. Mother Nyx's intention has always been to demonstrate to those who live nearby the efficacy of the law of serenity, and try to spread it. I don't know. Well, you see her, and then Apatea locks up for a second and kind of trembles, and then sags, and you can see sweat beading on her forehead as she kind of breathes a little raggedly. She says, "Never mind. Nyx would prefer I say no more. We will need to visit the outlying passes into the valley. Or I would like you to accompany me to do so." As she says this, she shucks off her habit and starts putting on her what seem to be trail clothes.
I avert my eyes at the shucking of the habit. But I immediately start talking anyway. I say, "So a trip then, and you can't say more, but we're in. This sounds like a lead. That's great."
She nods once and says, "I hope it turns out to be more of a lead than an emergency," but as she finishes sort of like tightening the drawstrings around her wrists, neck, and waist on, her sort of night blue, something between a shirt and a jerkin, and begins working on the lacing of her boots. She sort of looks thoughtful for a moment and then says, "Lyssa, you had mentioned having a strategy that you might be able to use if the ancestor spirits made trouble. I don't wish to pry, but we may be close to the moment of truth here. What can you tell me?"
I am still learning how this works myself, but I am occasionally overcome by a fury, and she seems to sustain herself on the rage of others.
As you say that, you feel maybe a stir and respond to the sensation of relief from around the periphery of the valley. And you kind of have to clam up for a second and center yourself. You're not in danger of being overtaken, but you've been alerted that Mavia is on a hair trigger.
I look at Dask and say, "Whatever is going on has awakened our friend."
Oh, I'm looking over my shoulder to see if it's safe to turn all the way around. And since boots are coming on at this point, I do swivel in the chair and I say, "I should note that I have been able to put our friend back in the bottle, as it were, but I've also found myself unable to. And the difference seems to be whether or not our friend meets her match."
Apatea nods slowly and says, "So this other consumes fury until something satisfies them? Do I have the right of it?"
As well.
Or until there's no fury left to consume.
Yes, that's as much as we've been able to understand ourselves.
She finishes sort of buckling on her carrying gear, which you notice includes crossed kind of in the small of her back, two very long, thin knives in sheaths, with what seem to be sort of custom grips. Like they seem to have been forged to conform to her specific hands, as comfortably as possible. Which is the sort of thing that just is not done in Taraxis, but Lyssa at least would be maybe like surprised to see it, but not surprised that it's possible given the metalwork you've seen here.
My eyebrows reach my hairline, and for a moment I completely forget about Mavia and just gesture to the beautiful work of these two knives and say, "May I?"
Apatea is sort of facing away from you right at that moment, turns and sort of sees what you're talking about and says, "Oh," and she draws one of them and flips it around to you. You notice that based on a cursory glance, the blades seem to be made out of an unfamiliar alloy.
The work on these is incredible, and I kind of tap the blade with a fingernail to kind of see what the metal feels like. What are they crafted from?
She gives kind of a half smile and says, "I am afraid I'm going to have to disappoint. I don't know very much about metalwork, but they were a lovely gift to the temple in my honor when I was coming of age, and I have, never knowingly gone into danger without them, although fortunately I have rarely had to use them. They are fine work, though, weighted deliberately, but very light, as I'm sure you can see. They seem not to be prone to rust or, they lose their edge very slowly." Which is kind of incredible to you, given how thin the blades are. You're maybe not looking quite at like a stiletto, but, anything meant for slashing, and these are edged as well as pointed, in Taraxis would have a blade made of sterner stuff. As far as you can tell, masterwork.
I flip them back around so she can take their handle, and I say, "They're almost as incredible as their wielder."
She smiles a sharp smile at you, and says, "Perhaps as incredible as the eye that can discern so," and punctuates her line by sliding it back into its sheath. And she sort of takes a deep breath and says, "My apologies for steering things back to more practical matters, but what should I expect when your other arrives?"
I look at Dask.
In a word... Okay, I can't take it down to one word. In a few words. Danger and unpredictability, ungovernability, of force seeking rage and producing violence. If there do happen to be bystanders, then we've reason to believe they will lose themselves and engage in wanton acts of rage and violence and such. So we may, if it comes to this, wish to do it as far from people as we possibly can.
I stare into the middle distance and say, "She's not me."
Apatea nods very seriously. She says, "I know. I don't know how well we'll be able to isolate ourselves. I don't know what we'll find. Do you..." She looks down, closes her eyes for a moment, and looks back up at you. "Are you able to bring her forward? Her? Are you able to bring them forward at will?"
I've never tried. I've never wanted to try. And it was only recently that due to circumstances, I realized that maybe it might actually be helpful.
"Mavia."
As a practical matter, it's always come up in life-threatening situations involving other supernatural entities.
She nods, but what she says is, "Mavia." And she looks at the hand with the snake tattoo on it. She says, "It's a good name." And gives you a slightly quirked quarter smile, let's call it.
I hug her.
If I say she stiffens, you're going to think it's because she's uncomfortable, but it's more like she sort of jerks a little bit, at which point you remember that she experiences everything with all of her senses, and then relaxes into the hug and returns it. She does, after a moment, pull away, though, and says, "We must go. What's the fastest you can travel?"
I'm not sure we've ever considered this question. Well, it occurs to me for the first time that my Zeno's paradox, which I used as a defensive gesture, could in theory be used to travel faster. A form of teleportation that doesn't involve going back to Fermata. But I've never tried it, so I express this as best I can. I say I do seem to be able to change how much space there is between two people, places, I suppose, places. I'm not really sure what happens to what's in between, though.
I am very, very happy with that phrasing. I don't usually disrupt the flow of conversation to commentate, but my god, that was wonderful.
This is a system predicated on the GM and the players giving gifts to each other, I think.
So, you are level 5 in your domain, which gives you lesser creations and destructions, preservations, and divinations for free, as well as major divinations. Okay. Apatea regards you seriously and says, "You are nothing. You could make there be nothing between us and our destination." She makes it into kind of half question, half statement.
I've reason to believe that I could.
She nods once and she says, "Would it leave you able to participate in whatever may come when we get there?"
A good question. My best answer is, I hope so. If getting there quickly is the most important thing, if that's the main thing I can contribute, if we may have an emergency on our hands, then maybe it doesn't matter.
She looks thoughtful for a moment. Correction. She shudders slightly, looks thoughtful for a moment, and then nods once and says, "I take it you've never tried this before."
Not, as such, no.
She nods. She says, "I suppose there is no time like the present." Her voice quavering slightly on the last word.
To minimize risk, is there some place we could stand where there is nothing between us and our destination but open land or forest or something like it? I'm not confident about what would happen to buildings, much less people, in between.
She looks thoughtful for a moment and then gives you that pointed smile again. It's astonishing. You've seen her 2 rows of sharp teeth quite a few times by now, but it always seems to surprise you, as most of her smiles do not reveal them. She says, "You are in Kilata. There is much I can do. Follow me." And she takes a couple of small wrapped bundles and puts them in her various little pouches around her waist, and walks with purpose out through her door and down the hall. it's amazing. She's still very small overall, but wearing the sort of trail gear and being businesslike, she is somewhat larger of stature in your mind.
I look respectfully.
Robin respectfully or Lyssa respectfully?
Lyssa respectfully, which is a different respectfully entirely.
There's respect, but it's also, one who appreciates works of art does still look deeply, even when respectfully. A connoisseur.
Well said. I presume that you follow.
Yes, that too.
Yeah, that's a safe assumption.
She leads you out of the temple and along the facade of it toward one side of the canyon. You come to the edge of the canyon. She holds out her two hands to her sides and slightly back in a pretty clear gesture for each of you to take one of her hands.
I take one.
I take the other with a squeeze of encouragement.
She doesn't turn, but instead looks up. And you feel around your Arcturitas the miracle take hold as the three of you just simply lift into the air, as though you were in the ending stages of Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. And it's not fast, and yet it seems to go quickly. You overtop the edge of the canyon and set down up on the plateau the canyon is cut into. And once your feet are down on the rock and scree, still holding your hands, Apatea looks at Dask and says, "I don't believe there are any settlements between us and our destination now." She sort of closes her eyes for a moment, opens them and looks around, and says, "Well, destinations. I suppose there are several passes we could check, but the nearest one," she points at a distant peak, and once she's sure that you're looking at it, moves her finger just a little bit to the right, and says, "About there, if it helps."
I think it does. All right. Without fully thinking about it, I start making gestures like a magician preparing tricks, even though there's no one to distract. Waves of hands and flourishes. And I say, should we drop ourselves off at the peak and then work our way down? Yes, let's make sure we don't end up in the middle of a rock face. That wouldn't do anyone any good. All right. I focus on the peak, the point that she originally pointed to. And I unnecessarily put out my arms, as I am wont to do, and fan my fingers as see above. And I remove the space between where we're standing and the place that we want to be standing, such that if we were to take a step forward, a single one, we'd be exactly where we want to be, removing the sky between us.
Important question. What kind of miracle are you using for this?
You have all these pesky questions. This, I think... It's a good question. So, I feel like this is possibly a lesser destruction. Well, no, because it would have to be a destruction of nothing. So maybe it's a lesser creation. I'm creating nothing between the 2 points, only long enough for us to all take one step.
So, if you were going 100 yards, I feel like this would be a lesser creation. Since you are going an not inconsiderable number of miles, I feel like this is probably a major creation.
Okay.
Which means that it's going to cost you 2 miracle points. Now, by my count, you have 0 domain miracle points. which means that it's actually going to cost you 4 miracle points from somewhere else using the right of the last trump.
Well, quick table talk. I think we've sort of already decided in character, but Apatea seemed to think this was a timely matter. Robin, you feel the same? We need to get our bad selves over there.
I feel the same.
Assuming we're not walking into a fermata that is literally on fire, which stranger things have happened. I may not need Realm right away, so I think I'm going to use the right of the last trump and take 4 of my Realm Miracle Points, or rather, Realm Miracle Points, and make this thing happen.
Okay. That'll leave you with 1 Realm Miracle Point, and you fuel your greater creation nothing between yourselves and your destination. You take 1 momentous step. And Dask, you are probably the dizziest at this transition, but indeed you cover something probably like 40 miles. I don't have the kilometer conversion in my head for that.
Damn you, American public school system.
What it's like... No, that's kilograms. I don't know what the conversion for kilometers to miles is. Kilograms is 2.2 pounds per kilogram. Damn. In any case, you travel a couple of days worth of walking in a single step. And the elevation change is actually what makes Dask particularly woojy. And with that 1 step, the 3 of you are standing more or less at the peak of a mountain, looking down into a pass. The pass is roughly northwest, maybe north-northwest of Kilata. And you can see from this high elevation, hazily, but beautifully, the valley spread out in one direction, and below you, more immediately, this pass leading off to one side. And if you sort of squint into the distance, you can see another valley, less grand, less expansive, but very beautiful in its own way, and with signs of extensive habitation stretching off to the northwest. And in the pass, approaching the valley that you spent your time in Diamachor in, you can see, well, the phrase that comes to mind is war party. There are somewhere between 50 and 100 men and women in chainmail, leather, and furs, wearing or holding axes, swords, spears, shields. And they are not marching, not like a formal army of the sort that is spoken of in Taraxis only in old poetry, but rather in sort of a loose group. The analogy from my experience is Boy Scouts hiking. but a relatively large, heavily armed group. Making their way through the pass, chatting, laughing, seemingly unconcerned. They are perhaps 500 vertical feet below you and 300-400 yards of lateral distance. They're not very far into the pass.
Are they marching towards Kilata?
Apatea nods slowly and says, "Or at least into the valley. This has not happened in 20 or more years."
They don't seem especially furious, as far as I can tell, but I suppose you could sound for it better than I can.
Might be a good time for a divination.
Certainly.
I should say I say this while steadying myself on the both of them, which probably puts my arms at two very different heights, since I'm dizzy from the step.
For sure.
I look like the Bloodborne making contact gesture.
I need to finish that game. Okay.
You never finish, man.
That's a good point. So, let's see. A lesser divination, Lyssa?
I would think so. I want to figure out... So it seems to me that the reason the Bleeding Wound of Fury feels as though pressure is being applied is because they are anticipating on releasing that fury momentarily. So I want to inquire into that. I want to ensure that their intentions are to harm those in the valley.
Okay. You open your senses to your estate. And you have in mind the question about their intent. And you actually get a pretty clear answer. The answer you get is that this is a raid. They're not looking to murder people, they're looking to haul off wealth. But there's something around the edges that gives you momentary pause before you realize that it reminds you of watching the ancestor spirits swirling around Apatea. You're not sure, but you infer with relative confidence that this raiding party is being used.
Whatever forces are at work with them will rally them into a fury when they arrive at their destination. They themselves, I don't think, intend to wreak any harm, but I can feel those things around them.
So we're uniquely positioned to know that the situation could go from bad to far worse.
It will.
Well, we need to stop them then.
Apatea
Vertical distance doesn't present too much problem, but what we do once we're face-to-face with them, that might be more of a concern.
Apatea, for her part, is gripping the hilts of her daggers tightly in their sheaths as she looks down. And she doesn't... mutters is the wrong word. She says softly, "This is what all of Diamachor was like. By the time I was old enough to remember, things had changed, but the raids and the theft, the violence, the glamorization of murder. Lyssa, you can feel fury rolling off of Apatea in waves. This is the first time you felt even a hint of it from her, even when she was determined before. She held herself back from fury, but now it would not be an exaggeration to say she is furious.
I unconsciously lean in her direction, like someone who has just caught the scent of freshly baked sweets or dessert.
And for what it's worth, it is actually a relief. Standing close to someone who is this angry soothes your pain. Looking down on the valley, Apatea says, "We have to confront them. I hope we can get them to turn back. But if not," she looks at Lyssa, "the nearest village is 10 miles away. Do you think that's enough space?"
I hope so.
She nods once, looking very serious. and glances at Dask and says, "Can you get us down there?"
Would this be a lesser?
Yeah, the
Deviation?
distance is
Yeah.
much smaller.
Okay. So yeah, so it probably takes some visual calculus to figure out stepping down. There's a danger, I imagine, of like when you're walking down a set of stairs in the dark and you're not sure where the last step is. I try to make sure that as we are stepping down, we step down the correct amount. But I focus on the point where we'll want to step to, and once again, I simply negate the air that would be between the 2 points.
Certainly. So Dask, you sight in on the pass and about the spot that you want to end up, and you concentrate. You grab the hands to either side of you of Apatea and Lyssa. You take a single step, and using a lesser creation miracle, you end up down in the pass about 30 meters, 100 yards, somewhere in that vicinity, in front of the advancing raiding party. You're not sure what it looks like to them to see the three of you step once and end up here, but they draw up quickly, the ones who can see you in the front, and those behind who jostle into them from the back. This is a group that is recognizably Diamachor. Relatively short-statured by Taraxan standards, men and women, with skin tones that range from tan to medium dark, hair that tends toward dark. The differences are mainly in their armaments and their apparel. These raiders are wearing furs, leathers, and chainmail. They're carrying axes, swords, spears, and shields, as well as supplies. And in a couple of notable cases, carrying empty bags, presumably for hauling off wealth and loot. They draw up short and regard you. And unlike Apatea, they speak in Diamachor. A tall woman, not as tall as Lyssa, but similarly muscled, speaks first. If I could get Diamachor language rolls from the two of you.
No problem there. That's 6 dice for me.
And 3 for me. Ooh, 2 6s.
No matches.
And the other one was
I'm
a
wrong.
9.
I'm sorry. Nice. That's actually a pair of twos.
Nice.
Excuse me.
Okay.
Not as bad as I thought.
Yeah, you
Two. Sorry, I missed the noise because I was so relieved I didn't get no matches with 6 dice.
So, the woman steps forward with her hand on a warhammer held at her belt. And Lyssa, you particularly note that this warhammer is not simply a strategically shaped heavy steel head on a fine wooden haft with a leather wrapping around the grip, but that the sides and top of the head of the hammer are etched. You can't see the details from here. You're probably a good 20 feet away from the woman who has stepped out ahead of the others, but you can see that it has been decorated in relatively fine metalwork. Her hand is on sort of the haft where it is through a loop in her weapon belt. Her hair is pulled up the sides into a braid starting at her forehead and traveling down the back of her head and falling down her back. She's wearing what seems to be well, a cloth underlayer with a leather overlayer and then a studded leather jerkin. And she has a pack on her back. She glares at the three of you. And as far as you can glean, Diamachor says, "Who impedes the progress of the war party of the North?" Apatea blanches as though she has been struck and remains silent.
What's our move here? Do we try to charm them? Do we try to seem intimidating? If there's, if they outnumber us, not quite 100 to 1, but close, that's a challenge.
They're also mortals.
Probably
True, but they don't know that we're not yet.
25 to 30 to 1.
Excuse me. Okay, good call.
Because there are three of you and between 50 and 100 of them.
Gotcha. Math was not my major.
Mine neither, but...
I am going to do a ghost miracle and kind of draw the shadows to me, serpentine and sinuous, as though I briefly become a snake lady, knowing that may resonate with their understanding of the ancestors.
Mavia stirs within you.
Oh. And I say, there is no war party. These villages are protected.
Okay, so you say that in Diamachor, and you feel that you are pretty well understood. You're satisfied with your tone and presentation, but you're unnerved by the fact that, to your own ears, you seem to be speaking with two voices. Yours and Mavia's. She doesn't subside after having stirred, but rather presses and reaches and strains toward the war party in front of you.
I grab Dask's hand.
We've established I can't give you that sweet nothing like I do with Apatea, right? That I ping off of you and it doesn't work. So I just provide support in a more mundane squeeze of the hand kind of way.
The woman in the front, her grip tightens on the haft of her warhammer, and she says, "Protected by 3? It has been years since the Vale has suffered a raid. They need to be reminded of what can happen to those who go soft." On the word soft, Mavia, you can almost feel it as though a hand reaching towards the woman speaking.
I think you'll find that there is no softness in choosing peace.
The woman immediately barks a laugh that triggers a ripple of more nervous laughter among those behind her. And she slowly and deliberately draws her warhammer out into one hand, reaches to her back and pulls her shield forward and says, "If you are so strong, prove it."
In a last-ditch effort to avoid what is clearly about to happen, I give a quick look to Apatea, release both of their hands, and then I face the woman and I assume the aspect of nothing.
Fascinating. Just a moment.
I aim to be, yeah.
Okay.
Taking full advantage of the fact that I haven't said a word to this person yet.
Upon assuming the aspect of nothing, the woman takes a full step back, pulling her shield up in front of her and putting her hammer kind of behind her as though both ready to swing and kind of deferred. And a seeming flurry of thoughts and feelings cross her face. And then her glance goes back to Lyssa, and she looks thoughtful for a moment before her gaze slides to Apatea, and her expression curdles into a snarl. She raises the hammer above her head, and those behind her all draw their weapons and shields as well. Immediate reactions.
If you choose to fight us, you will regret it.
As soon as the word "it" is out of your lips, the woman yells a blood-curdling war cry. It's nonverbal, and I will not do it into the microphone to spare our listeners and our players. Raising the warhammer above her head in one hand, with her shield out in front of her in the other, she charges towards you. And the mass of the raiding party follows. It looks as though you are in for a fight.
Damn.
Lyssa, for what it's worth, most of the war party has about the same relationship to Fury as they had before. The woman who stepped out in front to talk to you is boiling over. And as far as you're concerned, keeping Mavia from taking over is like it's like cellophane trying to keep a hand from passing through it as it presses forward evermore.
I look to Apatea with an unspoken question.
When you look at Apatea, she has one tear from each eye of blood trickling down her cheeks, and she glances at you with a solemn expression and very slowly nods once.
I turn my gaze back to the woman charging at us, and I meet her cry with one of my own, and throw my hand forward, and as I do, where my fingers splay apart, it becomes the opening maw of my tattoo.
Mavia comes to the fore. Dask, this is kind of the first time you've had a chance to observe the process. It isn't an Animorphs-style metamorphosis, but using both your mortal and divine senses, you can see the process take place very quickly, but in sort of an onset. And Lyssa, her place in the mortal world is assumed by Mavia. And it's like you're looking at the same person, but at a different time and in a different way, from a different angle. A lot of the features and a lot of the specific details remain the same, and yet there is something altogether more wild and primal. There are certain things that you can zero in on. You can't really focus on any one detail. That's new. Where Lyssa's hair is not unkempt, but sort of artfully mussed, Mavia's sort of streams constantly in an airflow that only she can seem to be affected by. Where Lyssa's large frame is solid, Mavia's is, well, liquid isn't exactly the right word, but mobile, perhaps. And of course, where Lyssa has tattoos, Mavia has tendrils of shadow that don't seem to connect to her in a specific physical way, but are nevertheless clearly exuded from her. In the blink of an eye, Electo, Lyssa's hammer, is in Mavia's hand, and the cry that Lyssa lets go becomes resonant across multiple spectra: auditory, visual, and spiritual. Apatea drops like a sack of potatoes. And Mavia sprints preternaturally quickly forward, using both feet and tendrils to propel her toward the woman charging at you. The rest of the raiding party follows, perhaps 10 feet behind. Anything in particular you're doing?
Well, my posture is that of a firefighter, looking at a fire, hose in hand, but not confident that there's no knot in the line. I put myself between Apatea and what's about to be the melee. From this distance, you said the woman who initiated the attack, the leader, is a little bit ahead of the party. I perform a lesser creation of nothing on the handle of her warhammer. Briefly, there is no handle.
Interesting. This is again not in the spirit of Vanilla Nobilis, but I'm going to make a roll here to see what happens. Just to inject some chaos into the proceedings.
Goody. That's what I'm looking.
Even more chaos.
The handle, for a moment, blips out of existence. And you're not sure if you're seeing the result with your mortal eyes or your divine ones. But you see the head of the hammer fall and sort of meld with the woman's hand. So she has now the head of a warhammer on the end of her arm. And when the handle blips back into existence, she seems to be holding the axe again, but she seems also to be grinning maniacally. And in the next moment, Mavia collides with her bodily. You see the woman swing the warhammer, and maybe it connects with Mavia, but all you can see is tendrils of shadow and moving bodies. And then Mavia is moving past the woman, who is on her hands and knees in the dust of the pass, breathing heavily. Mavia moves into the mass of raiders as the woman slowly pushes herself to her feet and looks at you. Only now, she looks at you with a face that is part mountain lion, and she holds her warhammer in a hand that has tawny fur and retractable claws on it. Mavia crashes into the advancing horde of raiders as the woman throws her head back and yowls like a mountain lion, and then sprints towards you on 2 legs and 1 hand, holding her warhammer aloft.
I pull Apatea out of the way, saying squarely to the mountain lion woman, "We tried to warn you." And then I use my new trick, and the space between the woman and the inside of the mountain behind us briefly ceases to be.
You see a moment of blur, and then she's gone. Looking ahead of you, there is a melee. you can see the tendrils from Mavia sweeping through the crowd of raiders, and everywhere they touch, people burst into animalistic features. Some of them fall to fighting each other. Some of them try to fight Mavia. Some of them dash toward you. Apatea shakes her head, opens her eyes with a flutter, and stands, pulling her knives into her hands.
A more hands-on approach from here on out.
Apatea takes a deep breath and says, I hate the sound of blood. If we're going to stop them here, I think it will have to be hands-on. She crouches as she says this. Not all the way down, but sort of back into almost a sprinter's crouch, holding her knives in front of her, blades down. And then exhales slowly and sprints forward.
I had started to say, I trust you, together, but I didn't get the line out before she started sprinting, so I awkwardly sprint after, and I draw my Mambele.
Okay. Now, Robin, you have been sort of on the outside of this for a moment because Mavia has been taking control, but at the moment, you're playing her. So, you don't have total control over Mavia, but you can kind of steer her, to borrow an analogy from, I think, one of the Daily Show books. You can sort of steer her by alternately pushing and pulling levers in the back of a Ferrari, as it were. Broad control. Mavia is in the middle of this melee, and the 10 to 20 people closest to her have beastified, but unpredictably after that. You're not entirely sure what their fury will let them do. For what it's worth, Mavia, as sort of also the Duchess of Fury, is feeling far less pain and discomfort now. Rather, she is sort of reveling in being bathed in fury. But after this initial collision with the raiding party, what is Mavia's next step or action?
She's going to laugh maniacally and focus on whatever group of fury is in front of her, and attempt to just absolutely lay waste to them. Not even with Electo, she's just going to sweep those tentacles and try to send them flying against the rocks to hear the delicious crunch of their bodies.
Marvelous. So, let's get first from Mavia a 7-die fight pool.
I have 3 5s.
3 5s, okay.
I also have 2 6s, but I think 3 5s is better.
It's certainly going to do more damage. Let's see. It was 5s or what? What was the other number? 5s or...
Oh, 3 5s or 2 6s.
Okay, both of those are the right arm, so... one of your tendrils simply wraps around the arm of one of the warriors in front of you, and you see the arm spasm and then begin to wither. And you... Grin is perhaps the wrong word, but your teeth are showing anyway. Dask, any particular action as you sprint after Apatea?
Whew. How much can I see of the the chaos going on? Or there are a bunch of them? Like, how far are we from them? Are they attacking each other closest to us?
Some of those who have gone hybrid beast form are attacking anything within reach. Some of them are running toward you. The ones who remain human continue to charge. It is, in a word, chaos.
I try, since it's a day where I'm trying things I haven't tried before, I try throwing a cluster grenade of negation into the chaos of all of the freaking out combatants. Specifically, I look into the eyes of whichever ones I can find the eyes of first and try to take away whatever's motivating them and repeat the process as we run. Not sure if it'll work, but feeling like I have to try something.
So this would be a lesser creation.
I would think so.
The first one you lock eyes with seems to be part human, part falcon, perhaps. And you try to negate what is impelling it. Do you have any penetration on this?
Let's see. It's a lesser creation. Points are a little dear right now, so I'll add 1 point of penetration.
You're surprised to feel an Octoritas, but a weak one. And you punch through it. And you are operating here on instinct, so you're not sure precisely what you negate. But when it's gone, a relatively normal human, maybe 20 years old, brown hair, fresh face, misses a step and comes to a rolling flop in the dirt below. Apatea, just a little bit in front of you and to the left, takes a flying leap toward another of these beast people. Let me make a roll. Takes a flying leap, and using her 2 knives held downward in her hands, draws them sort of in opposite directions toward a shoulder joint and lops off an arm. She is summarily about a third covered in blood as the bear-like individual that she attacked falls to the ground howling. And then you're in the melee. Mavia.
It's not enough. I want, after feeling the wither of the arm of the person in front of me, I want to reach out and drag down everyone I can with my tendrils.
You are vaguely aware of taking blows to the head and arm. So that's going to be 2 killing to your head and 2 killing to your right arm. And then there is space around you suddenly as your tendrils whip around you. Not quite in a cyclone, but in sort of a circuit. Dask.
The metaphor I gave was a cluster grenade, something very grandiose and terribly masculine. But really, now that I know it works for me to penetrate this weak Octoritas, if I'm not directly defending, I am popping like bubble wrap each of those with whom I can lock eyes, and removing their animal aspects.
As a spear drives into your shoulder, you lock eyes with its wielder, and they crumple into the dirt 2 killing to your torso.
So
Apatea, for her part, starts whirling and slashing in the middle of this, her sharp teeth bared in... Well, usually you've seen it as a slightly sinister or menacing smile. Now, though, it makes you significantly more uncomfortable. Maybe you're probably not noticing this, but anybody looking on from outside would. Those closest to you are starting to turn on each other more and more. For your part, you're mostly just reveling in the outpouring of fury around you. Your tendrils whirl, strike, and spear, and more of those around you take on these animalistic forms and fall upon you, or Dask, or Apatea, or their compatriots in animal or human form. All of it is the height of glory for you. Dask, you lock eyes with another 2 of these hybrid animal people and send them to the dirt. And you seem to have found something of a rhythm. You are still being attacked, but you are evading serious damage as though you were at a dance. You have very unfond memories of your teenage cotillion experiences, and yet you think that if those dances had felt like this one, you might have been more on board for them.
suddenly the memory of Cotillion blends with the memory of learning about the school of the insouciant monkey, which is where I learned to dodge and weave. And I think, if only, all of these things could have been one thing.
Incongruously, you find yourself thinking of Vruta.
I jive with the thought, and I seem to have the mental space to have it, even as I'm popping popping the bubble wrap of these weak Octoritas's, and even as I'm avoiding harm as best I can.
You do notice at the tail end of this sort of particular moment of the melee that Apatea is keeping her attackers at bay, but is no longer able to inflict particular harm upon them as they flock to her more and more.
If I have any juice left in this action, I start running toward her, but if not, there's always next turn.
Indeed. You see her take an axe just above her pelvis, though it doesn't seem to bleed in the way that you would expect. And turning, she jumps on the offending axe wielder, still fully a human form, driving her knives into either of their shoulders just inside the collarbone, and then chomping down on their neck and bearing them to the ground. Mavia, your action.
It's so tiresome that the fury is not being dispersed randomly. It seems to be directed towards the dull people behind me. So, I'm going to do a lesser change and direct the fury that I feel around me towards itself to create a cycle like that which I experienced with the whirlpool.
Okay. So that'll cost you 1 domain point, I believe.
I think it was 2
It is in fact 2, yeah. Sorry, I was thinking of Dask's estate level. Or domain level, sorry. It is 2. But as Mavia, you perceive fury sort of like you would perceive water eddying around you. Only you have control over it, and you reverse the current. Every remaining human becomes some animalistic hybrid and falls upon their neighbor in furious and terrible destruction. And without fully intending or being cognizant of it, a wild laugh escapes your throat. Dask.
I'm running full tilt toward Apatea to make sure that she's not out of her depth, although some part of me knows she probably isn't. Another part of me thinks we'll be better taking this on together. So if there's anyone in my way, I'm cutting through them, divinely or mundanely. Mombele's been in hand the whole time. Presumably I've been using it to sort of, knock blows out of the way, but I've been attacking primarily with nothingness.
Your eyes are now fixed on Apatea and heading toward her, so do roll your Mombele 4+ Master Die.
Will do. That is 3 5s.
A strange-looking stoat man sort of appeared seemingly from nowhere in front of you, brandishing a sword, a short one, curved oddly, in either hand, and mouth open, teeth exposed, yowls at you, bringing the swords back, and you simply hack into one of the arms, spin around him, and are gone toward Apatea, feeling as though you are unstoppable. Apatea, for her part, seems finished with the warrior she bore to the ground. He seems pale and limp. She has blood from her upper lip to her belly button, and a somewhat beatific expression on her face. She glances towards you, seems to come back into the moment a little bit, and then leaps just past your left arm. Attacking a man hybridized with a creature unfamiliar to you, but which some of our listeners may recognize as a wolverine. Just as it was about to bite into the back of your neck, she slams 2 daggers into its chest and then kicks it off. She licks her lips.
I don't have anything better to say than thanks, which I do, and then try to get my bearings and be more aware of my surroundings.
And all at once, there's a critical mass that is reached. Mavia, you lose control of your tendrils. They whirl around you twice and then shoot directly upward to the extremity of their length, plunging back downward into the ground, which erupts around you as the spirits of the soil and the rock are enraged. Those remaining in the war party who can move under their own power scatter. And you feel powerful, glorious, triumphant, and transcendent. Dask, you and Apatea huddle together for a moment as dirt and rubble cascade over you. The quiet after the melee is brief but profound. Dask, you find yourself protectively sort of embracing Apatea, her head kind of nestled towards your collarbone, your arms around her shoulders, hers around your ribs, as the dust quite literally clears. Mavia, you go from a moment of pure triumph to feeling utterly bereft as the fury that sustains you scatters to the winds, turning sour and to fear. You collapse where you stand, your tendrils withering into a mist and then nothing, and you are once again submerged. Lyssa lies in the dust, feeling spent, weak, unable to stand. Dask, Apatea jolts in your arms and takes 2 hurried steps back, looks left and right. Her gaze lands on Lyssa, and she looks a little stricken, and she hurries over to where she lays.
In fact, we nod to each other and hurry together.
You're just a step or 2 behind her as she goes.
As together as we can. As I'm running, it occurs to me for the first time to look back at the mountain into which the mountain lion woman disappeared, half expecting to see a hole in it shaped like her.
There is no evidence of her passage. Lyssa, your vision...
keep pace.
Your vision comes into focus just in time to see Apatea above you. She looks concerned. Dask joins her a little further down a moment later. Apatea reaches into one of her carrying pouches. You can't see what it is she cradles in her hands. Dask, if you happen to glance that way, it looks like a plant. But for a moment, you only see it for a moment, before she crushes it. Lyssa, you see she blinks twice, at which point tears of blood begin to track their way down her face. And she murmurs almost too quiet to hear, "I'm sorry." You black out. Dask, you see Lyssa fall into unconsciousness. You see Apatea's tears as she opens her hand and lets the crushed plant fall to the ground beside Lyssa. The raiding party is gone. The valley seems safe as far as you can tell. Danger, as it would appear, has passed. But in a further moment, in the time it takes for you to draw a breath to say something, Apatea crumples into the dirt beside you, hands over the back of her head, her forehead pressed into the ground, and emits a forlorn wail as of a child who has just lost something very dear to them.
Before and without knowing why, I put my hand on her back in a comforting way, and I can't stop myself for too long from saying, "It seems like we won."
Lyssa, her eyes flutter, but she doesn't quite come awake. Apatea tightens the ball that she's in, and her wail subsides into sobs. You can just see, if you kind of bend over to look, that her tears of blood are dropping to the ground and immediately soaking into it. It takes you a moment to understand. She's muttering in Diamachor, under her breath. I didn't want to, I didn't want to, I didn't want to. Lyssa?
You wouldn't have unless you'd had to. And you did have to. Just say the word and I'll provide a moment of nothingness in the respite. I'm going to check on Lyssa, however.
Yeah. Lyssa, you slowly swim back into consciousness, feeling enervated as you always do when Mavia has taken hold. And then some. You have 0 miracle points in any category. The first thing you see when you open your eyes, your head having walled to one side, is a crushed nettle resting beside your head. As your attention sort of focuses again, Apatea is balled up, forehead to the ground next to you, sobbing brokenly and muttering in Diamachor, too softly for you to catch. Dask, looking alarmed and bewildered, is trying to comfort her while looking at you. You're not sure you could stand if your life depended on it.
Did we fix anything?
As much as we could have. It was terrible, but you were incredible. Brave. Like always.
The ground below you, Lyssa, seems to be leaching the strength out of you. The acute pain in the estate of fury, has dulled to an ache, but expanded. You now perceive it as a ringing in your ears, spots floating in front of your eyes, tingling in your limbs, as well as a pain in your soul. It is more diffuse now, but deeper. Apatea slowly uncurls. You see her face streaked with blood. Her mouth, where she apparently fed on someone. Her eyes and cheeks, where she was apparently crying blood. She won't meet your eyes. And she mutters, just barely loud enough for you to hear. Mother Nyx demanded it, but it wasn't right. It's the first. It wasn't right. And she throws herself onto you, embracing you, even though you can't lift your arms to hug her back. She smears blood on your shoulder and neck as she tries to get close to you.
Are you hurt?
Her sobbing transitions over the next couple of seconds to a broken laugh. And she stands, looking up at the sky, and she says, I am stronger than ever. She looks down at you with a crooked smile, and you feel something waiting at the edge of your Arctoritas for your permission to enter.
Can I tell anything about this presence?
Nothing at all.
I let it in.
Immediately, all of your pain and numbness and discomfort is replaced by warm comfort. You're experiencing a domain miracle of the nobilis of sensation, and rather than impart to you any specific sensations, she has imparted to you that which you will find most comforting and comfortable. You perceive the temperature around you to be exactly that which you prize most in the turning of the seasons. The light dims slightly, but not much. Just enough to not be harsh. You feel the haft of a hammer clutched in your right hand, even though you're not sure where Electo is right now. And you feel slender but strong arms wrapped around you from behind, clasped in front of your sternum. You're hearing the distant, soft, sort of burble rush of the Wayland River, mingled with the only just audible sounds of the smithy. It's all you can do not to simply roll over and go to sleep on the spot. It's at that point that you realize, and Dask, you've sort of watched this happen in a little bit of stunned observation. Apatea has picked up Lyssa in sort of a princess carry. The sight is almost comically incongruous, and yet Apatea seems to be taking it completely seriously. She looks fondly down at Lyssa, and then seriously over at Dask, and says, "We must return immediately. Can you?"
Immediately. At a cost, but of course.
She nods once. And, wherever you wish to take 2 miracle points from, you can get back to Kilata.
I'll take these from Spirit.
Excellent. With a thought and a step, the 3 of you are back in front of the temple. Apatea lays Lyssa at the base of the statue that she was meditating near only less than a day ago. And she kneels by where Lyssa is partially sensate adrift in this sea of comfort and fatigue. She looks up at Dask and says, "Mother Nyx has seldom been cruel to me before. But I think that the 2 of you should go before she is cruel to me again."
If Lyssa could speak right now, and indeed, when she can speak again, it's not just a question of what she would say, but what she will say. She wouldn't want to flee from cruelty. She wouldn't want to avoid a wrong, but right it. How can we help you?
Apatea gives the bitterest chuckle you've heard her give. She stands and looks up at the visage of the statue that appears to be representative of her, but does not really look like her. And she says, "Near the top of the temple, there is a bell. If you can trust me around Lyssa, I ask that you ring it and return here. I have..." She stops and swallows, looks down at Lyssa, and says, in a voice trembling with unmistakable anger that comes as sort of a salve to Lyssa in her semi-sensible state. She says, "I have an announcement to make." She kneels down next to Lyssa and begins running her fingers through Lyssa's hair. Lyssa, for your part, this feels marvelous.
I smile and sigh to myself and murmur, "Thank you."
You feel spots of warmth on your cheeks that you think at first might be an uncharacteristic blush. But when you manage to open your eyes again, you can see that Apatea is crying tears of blood that are dripping onto your face. Dask, would I be correct in assuming that you go in search of the spell?
You'd be correct in assuming it. I smile at the two of them together, and I feel whatever weariness I'm feeling, and then I go off looking for the bell.
It's relatively easy to find once you work up the nerve to go through the constellation doors inside the temple. There's a staircase at the back of the grand hall there with these slender, seemingly architecturally unnecessary columns supporting vaults in the roof. And you head up, and it lets you out at the very top of the cliff where there's a small hutch containing a large, seemingly brass bell. And instead of having to pull to move the bell itself, you have a rope to move the clapper. You grasp it in both hands and feel, despite yourself, a sort of jolt of exhilaration as you all at once jerk it side to side. And Lyssa, you can hear the bell. It has a brassy but deep tone that carries throughout the canyon. It's almost as though it vibrates the whole place. And in its wake, there is uncanny silence. You can hear the river or stream that progresses down the middle of Kilata more loudly than anything until there are footsteps approaching. And around about the time, Dask, that you return, there is a fairly large crowd, giving the statue a modest berth, but otherwise packed together. Apatea stands up and faces the crowd. She pauses and then looks back over her shoulder at Dask, and in a low murmur asks, "Would you give me some nothing, please?"
Gladly. Hand on her back so that maybe even the crowd doesn't quite see what's happening. I juice her with a gentle but profound portion of nothingness.
She takes a deep breath and nods once, and then raises her voice and says, "People of Kilata, people of Diamachor, we were right to end the feuds and the raids, to end the violence. But I think that I was overzealous in my attempts to bring Mother Nyx's will to this valley. The disavowal should instead have been a forgiveness. We should not forget our ancestors, but rather acknowledge that their great deeds were born of a concern for their families, their communities. And instead of rejecting them, we should acknowledge the righteous motivation of their actions, while we also admit that the effects of their decisions were deleterious. I realize this will require an alteration of our laws and habits, but the mistake is mine, and I apologize sincerely to you. If we upheld the care of the shrines, and if not the worship, then at least a certain degree of reverence for our warrior forefathers and foremothers, I think we would see that there would be no more calamitous transformations. Those of you who are here to witness my words, please spread them to your friends and family. It is likely that you will not see me for some time. This is because I go to atone for my mistakes. I apologize for the worry and the heartache and the hardship that I have inflicted you with through my misinterpretation. I can only plead youth and seal for Mother Nyx's vision. But I think that we will all be better served going forward. And she sort of bows in the crowd's direction. They bow back briefly, and then disperse with a murmured, "As Mother Nyx wills it." She holds the bow for perhaps 2 minutes. At which point, Dask, you feel your Arcturitas tremble and then shatter. A sensation which is uncomfortable enough to you that it drives you to your knees. And when you're able to look up again, Apatea is unconscious before you, crumpled in a heap. More crimson tears of blood trickling from her eyes. Lyssa? You feel, not immediately, but over the next couple of minutes, restored. The pain and fury is gone. Only a bruise-like ache where it was. You sit up and are more or less in control of your faculties, if feeling weak and drained, as after a very long, very hot workout.
What happened? And at that point I probably see Apatea, and I go to her, looking at Dask with questions in my eyes.
Assuming I can speak, I say Apatea made a change to doctrine. Made a plea for balance, for honoring the ancestors without having to follow in their violent footsteps, and the people seemed perfectly willing to make this change, but then we were both struck in such a way that I think perhaps the powers that be may not be so willing. That's just a guess.
Are you okay?
I'm honestly not sure. I feel stripped bare, like a tree without bark, but I've got all 6 senses as far as I can tell.
As a player, I know the answer to this, but I also have a very specific problem on Lyssa's character sheet, which means that she doesn't understand this. I'm going to try to do a lesser creation of Fury and Apatea to see if I can rile her to consciousness and get her to wake up again.
Mm-hmm. Okay. You feel the miracle bounce off her Arcturitas. She is unaffected. When you try to draw more deeply to push it through her Arcturitas, you find that, like a runner that has pushed past their limits, there is nothing for you to draw on.
Has there been any further anything from whatever shattered my Arcturitas?
Nope.
I wipe the blood from her face, what I can, anyway. Mm-hmm. And I say, Apatea, wake up.
You see her eyes kind of twitch but not open, and she gives you a closed-mouth smile and says, "You're all right. That's good."
Dask, do something.
I'm not sure what to do. Is she... I kind of make my way over. It's not far, but it feels far right now. Can I... Would nothing help? This is to Apatea, of course.
She does not respond.
Do you know what happened? Was this divine intervention?
Who's that to?
I don't even know.
I just reiterate, Apatea, what happened?
She seems fully unconscious. She is still breathing. But she doesn't seem to be able to hear you.
I start to cry and I look at Dask and say, don't tell me I did this.
I don't know how you would have. You were... I mean, we know what it looks like when you and things that are not quite you rampage, and this was not that. This was the calm after a storm of rhetoric. I can't see how you could possibly be to blame.
Where it was late afternoon in the pass outside of the Vale, here in Kilata, where it's never quite full daylight, you've passed into the realm of full night. And it is perhaps only now, as you are at loose ends looking at Apatea and around you, that you realize, for the first time since you've been in this valley, no stars are visible. The darkness is complete outside of the lamps and lanterns and torches and candles lit by the people who live in this canyon.
Can we feel Fermata?
Feel it? Yes. Reach it? No.
Is an especially dark place in evidence? Someplace further from torchlight, lamplight?
Well, there is a temple built into a solid cliff face behind you that probably has rooms in which you could put out lamps or candles.
Kind of forgot about that.
I have a theory, and that's that this was perhaps the disapproval of a god, but not necessarily of Nyx. I don't know if that's right, but I think it may be time to phone home. I wouldn't have said phone home. There are no phones. It may be time to check in.
We can't leave her like this.
We'll take her with us. If she stirs, if she seems to be having troubled dreams, then I'll give her a little nothing for comfort. We'll keep an eye. I don't know what else to do unless you want to spoon feed her blood. That's a terrible idea. Forget I said it. Let's take her with us. Simple as that.
I try to pick her up.
Roll for lifting stance.
Alright.
Is this the first roll for lifting? No, it isn't.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
That is...
It's finally happening! Oh, it's a plus
Body
2.
plus athletics plus 2. So it's going to be 5 plus a master die.
I'm going to ask for the last time without an answer. Do you lift?
It's actually going to be just 5 because your weakness is a penalty that eliminates your master die. So
Okay.
5 dice.
2 9s! That was a harrowing moment.
I would like the listener to know that this is not really what this is used for.
It's not at all. It's just been a running joke.
Yeah, at the same time, you are lifting a heavy object after you had a chance to plant yourself in a situation where there was a possibility of failure, so, lifting stance.
Also,
I totally thought we'd gotten to use it at least once. This rules.
It's on the path of the giant woman, and I want to specify that I put verbiage in there that is specific to bear hugging, which I imagine is going on right now. So this is absolutely what lifting stance has been for.
At your discretion, yes, bear hugging is in effect. So, You lift Apatea in sort of a hug close to your chest with her head kind of resting on your shoulder, and you walk into the temple. And as is customary in this temple area, no one pays any particular mind to you, even as the three of you, bloody and ragged and covered in dust, you carrying the spokeswoman of their goddess, walk into this temple. You turn right toward Apatea's room. Walking in, there were no lit candles or lamps or torches or lanterns when you left, and upon closing the door behind you, the darkness is almost perfect. You can feel Fermata, and you can almost reach it. Now, Lyssa, you don't have any miracle points right now. Dask, you still have a little bit. So if you are willing to spend your last realm miracle point and 2 of your remaining spirit miracle points, you can get the 3 of you back to Fermata.
That seems like a worthy use. I look to Lyssa, much as I'm currently looking to Robin on a different plane of existence, and say,
do it.
And as Emperor Palpatine told me to, I do it. I spend those points, and whatever sources of light, whatever minuscule beams are coming under the door or through some small slit or whatever else those things cease to be, I put us in absolute darkness, and I take us to Fermata.
The 2 of you take a step, and there are the gates. Sensing your arrival, the one in front of you bangs open, and you're greeted with the sight of the statue plaza as you step into it. And the statue has been replaced by a wide, relatively tall column with relief carvings spiraling around it. Some of them are not visible from where you are, but the side that faces you is dominated by the 2 of you sort of facing away from each other, confident expressions on your face, weapons brandished against a horde of bestial people. And between Dask's back and Lyssa's back in this relief carving is a figure that seems to be meant to be Apatea. And each of you, with the hand not wielding your weapon, is holding one of her arms where her knives are held, as angled toward each of your backs, but unable to move because of your hands grasping her wrists. Her face is locked in this sort of villainous grin, and her eyes seem to be aflame. Nobody in the Statue Plaza is particularly paying attention to this, but the other thing that you immediately notice is that the whole Statue Plaza is bedecked in flowers like those that Lyssa once made a garland of. They are not flower crowns, but rather planters and garden boxes, and a small ring of soil around the base of the column. Hundreds conservatively of these flowers spread throughout as you enter, and the gate closes behind you. And I think that's where we'll end our session for tonight. You each get 1 mortal and 1 divine experience point. And I think this ended up being one of our longer sessions so far.
I also get some bonuses, right? Because Mavia, I don't know if yeah, I usually get an extra moral point for when Mavia appears, correct?
Specifically, when you suffer a bout of Mavia, you, I believe, regain a miracle point.
Oh, yeah.
So you may have exactly 1 wherever you wish to put it. As far as your problem and craving, neither of your problems came up this time. Your craving to release your fury did not end up hindering you, which is the condition under which it would give you an extra mortal XP.
Good to know. Lyssa was still stupidly forgiving off paper, though.
I suppose that is true. I would be willing to give you a mortal XP for being stupidly forgiving. Thank you for the good catch.
Right, thank you. Table talk. Does it make the most sense to put I'm going for domain, just in case I have to do any powerful things there.
The other thing is we're both tapped on Realm currently, and we're back in Fermata, so if we run into any kind of situation here, that might not be the worst idea. Domain is probably the handiest in general, though.
Okay.
At least so far.
Yeah, the difference here is that Realm is a lower level, so it's more likely to need miracle points and can
true.
Do basically anything a miracle can do within the chancel. Domain would let you then obviously access more potent fury abilities by having a miracle point there.
So I'm going to go with Realm for now.
Okay.
Since we're back here and can ostensibly rest up, and anything that hopefully is going to be pressing will occur within Fermata.
Here's hoping. And my domain level is higher than yours, so we're not helpless in that aspect.
That's
aspect
correct.
Is the wrong word, because aspect we are relatively helpless. You know what I mean.
Indeed. So I believe that concludes this session of Dice Punks. Thanks for joining us. I hope our players and listeners enjoyed it as much as I did, and that you'll join us again next time. If you're hearing us now, then you probably know where to listen to this, but we can be found almost any place that one can listen to podcasts, as well as on the wider web at dicepunks.com, and on Twitter as @dicepunks. With that, I think we're ready to say farewell. Say goodbye to the kind folks at home, players.
Thanks for listening, and when you see a wrong, write it. And just remember, that process may not come without cost.
Thank you for listening, everyone, and remember, if your friends hurt you, forgiveness is everything.
Very lovely sentiments. So thanks again for listening. We'll see you next time, and as the poet once said, we're losing daylight, but I can't work any faster. Under the veil of dusk we go on.
Thank you, dear listeners, for tuning in, and stick around through the admin stuff. There's a Lyssa's line waiting for you at the end of it. The songs in this episode, theme of the Dice Punks and its acoustic version, were written and recorded by the Regal of Nothing himself, Drew. Cover art is by Joanne, our illustrious spook mistress during our Halloween one-shot. Site design and graphics for dicepunks.com are by Robin, the layer behind Lyssa, the irrepressible Duchess of Fury. Rain and the one-roll engine it runs on were created by Greg Stolze, whose work can be found in a frankly astonishing number of cool places, but I'll point you toward gregstolze.com. Nobilis was created by Jenna Caterin Moran and can be found alongside much of her other really intriguing work both in and outside of tabletop role-playing at afarandsunlessland.wordpress.com. Links to both systems and authors can be found on the Punk Grimoire section of our website, dicepunks.com. Thanks so much for listening. If you liked what you heard, well, that's reward enough on its own, really, but if you're so inclined, you can help us out by rating and reviewing us wherever you listen to us, telling your friends who you think would like us to give us a listen, and even by heading over to our Patreon at patreon.com/dicepunks. We have fun rewards available to backers, including a patron-only Discord and access to the Dice Peaks After Show for episodes 1 and following. Regardless, we hope you'll tune in again, and until then, remember, subtlety is for cowards.
So, working at the Forge is, of course, a social affair. Not just because of the customers, but also because some projects become more of a collaboration with other artists. So we had a client that wanted something more ornate than Varric or myself had the means to create, so we reached out to a fellow craftsman in an adjacent village. The lad there was always a gem in my eyes. His hands were the most adept that I've ever seen at repoussé, or a metalworking technique that recreates ornamental designs by hammering on the bottom of soft metals. Hands as skilled and steady as those, well, they made my imagination run a little wild. The only problem with this fellow is that he was more than a little absent-minded. When I returned to pick up the tin piece that I had commissioned, he had misplaced it and sheepishly asked for my aid in finding it. Seizing the opportunity, I smiled at him and said, "You're the only tin I see." We found the missing commission later, and let me tell you, that man is very skilled at working malleable things with his hammer.